Welcome to Science from Your Sofa. I'm Kristen.
And I'm Emily.
And this week we're going to tackle Lake George's aquatic food webs. Let's find out what's living in Lake George. What starts the food webs of Lake George? It's of course the sun. The sun is what's putting the energy into our food webs. We then have our producers, the plants and algae that are making their food from the sun. Without those plants and algae, then our fish and other animals living in the lake wouldn't have a food source. So we're commonly asked, what are these plants growing in Lake George? And so Lake George is home to many different kinds of aquatic plants. We have all different kinds of pondweeds, we have pipewort, we have duck celery, we have coontail, a lot of different native plants out here. So as you can see, I'm in my wetsuit and I have my snorkel here. Let's jump into Warner Bay and see what we can find. These pondweeds and native grasses are providing food and shelter for the fish and bugs. They're producing oxygen, and they're even absorbing nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus.
So what comes next in the food chain? After algae, next on the food chain is the smallest animal that you'll find in Lake George, zooplankton. These tiny consumers slowly propel themselves up and down the water column in search of algae to feed on and to avoid predators. In Lake George, there are about 20 different species of zooplankton. However, we tend to see three groups more often than others. These three groups are copepods, cladocerans, and amphipods. The size of zooplankton are so small that to the naked eye, it looks like a grain of sand or pepper just floating around in the water. Zooplankton size can range anywhere from a few millimeters down to a few microns. So let's take a peek in the microscope to get a closer view. Here we have some copepods and cladocerans. These tiny animals have organs just like you and I. If you look closely at the plankton, you may see a little black dot. That's its eyeball looking back at you. You may also see a green area. That is their stomach. The green color comes from the algae that this plankton ate. Let's take a look at another drop. This drop has some very active daphnia, which are a type of cladoceran. Can you spot their eyes and green stomach from feeding on algae? Are zooplankton important to the lake? Yes, zooplankton is very important to the lake. First thing is that they're a food source for small fish like minnows, bugs, and also mussels. Zooplankton can also affect water quality, algal densities, fish production, and nutrient and contaminant cycling. Zooplankton are also very sensitive to changes in water quality, so they can be a good indicator if any changes in water quality happen on Lake George.
So you just heard from Emily that we have plenty of zooplankton in Lake George. So now that we know that there's some food out there, what kind of fish are living in Lake George? And so there's 36 different kinds of fish in Lake George. Lake George is what we call a two-story fishery. We have both warm water fish and cold water fish. So I'm still in my snorkeling gear, so we're going to head out into some shallow water to see if we can find some of those warm water fish. Well, in our quick little snorkel there, we saw sunfish and perch. We didn't see any other warm water fish, but there's many other different kinds. Bass are another common warm water fish of Lake George. Now, I don't have my scuba gear on today to get down into that deep water, but we have nice cold water fish living in those deep waters of Lake George. There's things like landlocked Atlantic salmon and lake trout.
So other than fish, what other animals may we find out in Lake George? Well, there's a wide variety of different mammals, reptiles, amphibians, and birds that you can find out there. For mammals, you may see some beavers, otters, mink, muskrat, as well as other common land animals like raccoons, chipmunks, squirrels, and many more. For reptiles, there's a wide variety of different turtles. So you may see some map turtles, painted turtles, as well as the big snapping turtles. There are also snakes around Lake George, so you will see your common garter snakes, your northern water snakes, and there's also some rattlesnakes around Lake George in some areas. For amphibians, there's a wide variety of different frogs and toads, as well as salamanders. And for birds, you could see some common loons. There's also great blue herons, variety of different ducks, so mallards, mergansers, gulls, and there are also some bald eagles flying around Lake George as well. As you learn from this episode, there's a wide variety of different plant and animal species that make up the food web in Lake George. Each species is very important to the food web, and if one thing were to happen to one species, it would affect the entire food web of Lake George.
So thank you for joining us on this episode of Science from Your Sofa. Our next episode will cover our invasive species of Lake George, so these species that are disrupting these food webs. We look forward to having you join us.